para empezar, no saben qué cosa más increíble. Si algo nos ha enseñado el COVID es lo globales que podemos ser todos. Y el día de hoy está con nosotros desde Oxford, en Inglaterra, el profesor de Ciencias del Comportamiento del Warwick Business School, cofundador del Departamento de Investigación Decision Technology Ltd. Él es especialista en neurociencia, psicología del comportamiento y percepción. Ha contribuido en más de 200 artículos y capítulos de libros. Es autor, coautor y coeditor de 14 libros, entre ellos The Mind is Flat. Y este hombre, déjenme decirles que es un gran picudo. De hecho, el libro en español se llama Todo lo que creíamos saber sobre el cerebro y estábamos equivocados. Y se nos ha dicho que tenemos creencias, deseos, miedos, una personalidad, todo basado en una vida interior, lo que llamamos el subconsciente. Bueno, pues el día de hoy, Nick Chater nos va a decir que todas esas cosas son tonterías, que el cerebro inventa todo a medida que avanza, no pasa nada debajo y no hay profundidades. ¿Qué tal eso? Hoy, en W Radio, Nick Chater. My dear friend, we're so happy to have you on the show. Welcome, Nick.
It's great to be here.
So tell me, where are you?
I am actually at my home in Oxford, in England. And like everybody else, I'm locked down. It's very quiet. The street has no cars. Everybody is tucked up in their houses. It's sort of okay. It's a bit weird.
So yeah, I was just talking about England and what's happening and the COVID. So we're so happy to have you here, because I was telling everybody that one thing that has been wonderful about being at home and what's happening around the world is we've had to be very creative on realizing that, you know, we're so global and that we do have the opportunity of talking to people, you know, across the world, no matter where they are. So it's a great honor to have you on the show. So thank you very much. I was just telling everybody about your book. So what is the premise of The Brain?
So I think the basic idea is that almost everything we think we know about our minds is wrong. So for many years, when I studied psychology, I'd always have that vague feeling that, well, I kind of half knew this. And, you know, it's kind of what I thought. It's common sense with a few extra additions. But I think in retrospect, that's totally wrong. In fact, psychologists have discovered things that are so weird, so strange about the mind, that we've kind of kept them quiet. They're almost so embarrassingly strange and so peculiar and so different from common sense that I think psychologists don't talk about these things. And what I wanted to do in this book is to say, let's level with everybody. The brain is much, much weirder than you imagine. So in particular, let me start with thinking about how perception works, and we can then think about how your thinking works as well. So in a very quite simple point about perception, which we all kind of learned at school and we forgot, which is that you only have color vision with a special kind of cell called the cone cells. So there is two kinds of cells in the back of your eye, in the retina, cone cells and rod cells. And the cone cells do all the color. Now, if you look on the retina and see where they are, they're in a tiny blob, which is in the fovea, which is where you're looking. So where you're looking exactly, if I look at a particular object, that my fovea in the back of my eye is looking at that. And I can see color. And as you move away from the fovea, you're effectively colorblind. So if you go a few degrees away, then you're essentially colorblind. Now that's extraordinary, because as I look at the world now, I think there's color everywhere. But there isn't. In fact, for me, there isn't. There's just a color where I'm looking. And the same applies to detail as well. So I can read a word if I'm looking right at it. If I'm not looking right at it, I can't read it. But if I look at a page of text on a screen or a book, I think I can see all the words. I can see hundreds of words, but I can't. I can see one word. And then I can see another word, then another one. And in fact, I'm imagining I can see the others, but I can't see them. So that's weird. I mean, that's telling us that our consciousness about the world is misleading us in a really fundamental way. In fact, roughly speaking, and I can give lots of examples of this, but we can, roughly speaking, see one thing at a time. One word, one face, one color, one anything.
Okay, let me say that in Spanish, and then we're going to give more examples. Yeah. Okay, entonces, dice que en este libro increíble que vale mucho la pena que ustedes lean, que se llama The Mind is Flat, una de las premisas es que pues el cerebro es una máquina muy compleja y esto y el otro, pero dice, para los psicólogos que no necesariamente profundizan tanto en esto, y él es psicólogo, Dice, la verdad es que entender lo raro que es el cerebro es impresionante. Por ejemplo, dice, nosotros creemos que nosotros vemos el color porque tenemos los conos en la parte de atrás del ojo o la fobia. Y dice, y creemos que como podemos voltear a ver para todos lados, vemos color, creemos que hay color en todos lados, pero no nos damos cuenta que solamente hay color cuando tú enfocas tu vista a un solo objeto. Lo mismo con las palabras. Tú puedes abrir un texto y creer que las cientos de palabras que ves en una hoja, tú las puedes leer o ver todas. Y la verdad es que no. Solamente puedes leer una palabra y una palabra a la vez. Eso significa que el cerebro es capaz de captar solamente en lo que enfocas tu atención. Let me see if I got this last thing right. The brain is only capable of like registering what you focus on and only
Absolutely.
what you focus on at that time.
That's right. That's right.
Give us another example, like on perception, on what we think is happening, on what we feel is happening.
Yeah, so a very clever way to test this is to have an eye tracker which monitors where you're looking. And so you have, say, a page of text, and I read the text, and when I'm looking at a word, that word is there, it is visible. And everywhere else, there is just a string of X's. There are no words. So just the only place there is a word is where I am looking. And then I read the text and you say to me, how was that? You know, what did you notice anything unusual? And the answer is, I didn't. I think no, there were words everywhere. I just read normally. And I don't even notice that, in fact, about 15 letters is all you need to see where you're looking. And everything else can be X's or Latin or Russian or anything. Yeah. And you don't notice.
That's amazing. Dice, miren, esto es tan cierto que hemos hecho estudios en donde, digamos que seguimos el camino del ojo. Por ejemplo, si tú tienes un texto y estás leyendo un texto, tú crees que el resto de lo que está en esa página son palabras, pero podrían ser X, así unas X, o podría ser latín, o podría ser ruso, y tú no te das cuenta. Cuando nosotros estamos leyendo, el cerebro solamente es capaz de captar 15 palabras. El resto de lo que podría estar ahí podría no ser nada, podría ser otro idioma, podrían ser garigoleos, que el cerebro no lo registra. Okay, explained. Okay, let's continue.
Perfect.
Now, on everyday life, Nick, like on what we think about our spouse, about our boss, about our children, about our relationships, what we think about a certain person, this was also affect.
I think the same trick is being applied there too. So when I want to read a word, and I wonder what word is in front of me, I can move my eyes and read it. As soon as I ask the question, what's over there? Or what color is that thing? My eyes move over and I'll answer the question. So as soon as I ask the question, the answer is there. And that gives me the impression that the answer was there all along. And it was not. I didn't know the answer, but I asked my eyes to move and they moved. Now that's an interesting trick, because if you ask a question and at the very moment you ask the question, the answer pops into your mind, you think the answer was already in your head. Now let me apply that now to what you think about your boss, say, or what you think about your children or anything, or your life. We tend, when we wonder about what do I think of my boss, or do I like this person, or whatever it is, the answer comes straight to us. We immediately think of the answer. And we're so good. This is a creative improvisation in my view, but we're so good at the answer that we think, I knew that already. I have a big book of thoughts in my head about my boss, my children, my life.
Hello. Did we have a misconnection? Lo que explicaba ahorita es que le digo, oye, pero a ver, entonces esto tiene que afectar la percepción que tenemos de las relaciones, de nuestro esposo, de nuestro jefe, de las amistades, de los hijos, de las relaciones en general. Y dice, sí, o sea, fíjate qué interesante. Cuando tú tienes que voltear a ver algo o fijarte en algo, automáticamente tienes una respuesta. Y tú crees que tu cerebro es tan inteligente, y ahorita quiero hablar con él de la memoria, y a lo mejor tiene un archivo de memoria tan cañón, que entonces puedes dar una respuesta muy rápido y hablar de lo que sea que tienes que hablar, porque tú crees que todo ese banco de memoria te está ayudando a recordar a lo mejor lo que sientes de esa persona, la experiencia que tienes con esa persona, pero la verdad es que no. El cerebro trabaja tan rápido y logra una respuesta tan rápida que tú crees que esa respuesta está como preguardada en tu cerebro y no, tu cerebro la maquinó justamente en ese momento. Es bien interesante para todos los estudiosos del cerebro que busquen este libro, porque este libro de hecho está editado inclusive en español. En español se llama Todo lo que queríamos saber sobre el cerebro, y estamos equivocados. Y como les decía al principio del programa, Nick Chatter, él es no solamente psicólogo, es neuropsicólogo, estudioso de la neurociencia y estudioso de la ciencia del comportamiento, lo cual es interesantísimo para todos. Entonces, lo que vamos a hacer es que vamos a hacer una pausa y regresando vamos a ver si podemos volver a enlazar al Nick Chatter desde Oxford, Inglaterra, a ver si podemos seguir hablando con él. Y estamos de regreso en W Radio a las 10:34 de la mañana. ¿Y qué tal lo cool? Ubican el libro que seguramente muchos conocen, que se llama The Mind is Flat, o Todo lo que creíamos saber sobre el cerebro y estamos equivocados. Nick Chatter, profesor de Ciencias del Comportamiento de la Warwick Business School y cofundador del Departamento de Investigación de Decision Technology, especialista en neurociencia, en psicología del comportamiento y percepción, está con nosotros enlazado desde Oxford, Inglaterra, explicándonos cómo funciona el cerebro. Ya les expliqué lo que dijo él antes del corte y obviamente la pregunta obligada es, yo pensé que parte de la razón por la cual reaccionamos como reaccionamos, decimos lo que decimos, tiene que ver con nuestro banco de memoria, que digamos que se junta para crear nuestra experiencia con un evento, con una persona. So the obliged question, Nick, I already translated to Spanish. Everything you said before the commercial break is, then what about memory? Like I thought that the reason why I have this perception of a certain person, of a certain situation, is because in my memory bank, I have all these images and all these experiences that at the end creates my perception of a certain person or a certain event.
Well, I think that's true to some extent. So your memory is much, much sketchier than we imagine. So we think we remember things in great detail, but actually we remember just little fragments, and our brains creatively take those fragments and reconstruct what actually happened. And often they reconstruct it incorrectly. So anybody who's had the experience of looking back at a diary is likely to have a mixture of feeling, oh, I remember that, and also, but that was not right, I'm sure it was different. So your memory is reconstructing information in a way that is actually it's taking the little fragments of memory and creating a new story. And sometimes it's a false story.
Dice, lo que pasa es que uno cree que la memoria de algo está intacta en tu cerebro. Y la verdad es que la memoria es mucho menos precisa de lo que uno cree. O sea, normalmente cuando uno accede al banco de memoria, y seguramente a muchos de ustedes les ha pasado que de repente agarran un diario y con esos pedazos empiezas a reconstruir lo que tenías almacenado de una manera no tan precisa, y eso me da paz porque entonces todos los que tenemos bastante mala memoria nos daremos cuenta por qué, pero que con esos fragmentos los usa para recrear lo que ya pasó, pero no lo puede hacer idéntico porque hay muchos pedazos que quedan incompletos. I think you understand what I'm saying in Spanish.
I do, yes, more or less, yes.
So basically is, now I'm not so afraid of how bad my memory is, because I'm thinking that all those little fragments that I access when I want to remember something are just bits and pieces, and the rest is just like completed by whatever you're living and thinking today.
Yes, that's right. And we know this because we can see that when you recall something, the way you recall it is often quite influenced by the situation you're in now. So, for example, if somebody asks you how quickly a car was traveling when it hit you in an accident, if you say how fast was the car going when it smashed into you versus how fast was the car going when it hit you, then in the case of smashed, you think, oh yeah, it was much stronger. It really hit hard. But the reason is that I just said smashed. So that makes you think, yeah, I'm remembering it as really, really a big impact. And those effects are everywhere. So it's like a lawyer leading a witness. By asking the right question, you can get the witness to actually literally recall something slightly different.
Dice, bueno, también cómo se guarda una memoria en el cerebro tiene que ver con cómo vives la situación en ese preciso momento. Por ejemplo, si un día estás en la calle y te pega un coche y yo te pregunto, ¿a qué velocidad crees que te pegó el coche? Tu respuesta va a ser una, a diferencia de que si yo te pregunto, oye, te pegó fuertísimo ese coche, ¿qué tan fuerte crees que te pegó? O sea, la influencia que tiene lo que estás viviendo en ese momento. Es como un abogado en una corte. Tú puedes sesgar a que la persona conteste una cosa u otra dependiendo de cómo fraseas la pregunta. Y es lo mismo para el cerebro. El cerebro lo puedes sesgar dependiendo de cómo le des la información. So you can bias the brain depending on what type of information or how you give the brain that information.
That's right. And the same applies to what you like as well as what you remember. So there's a famous experiment which was done by a postdoctoral student of mine before I worked with him. So I have no credit to me. A guy called Petter Johansson from Lund University in Sweden. So he and a friend of his, Lars Hall, did an experiment where you give people faces. You give them a pair of faces and you say, which is your favorite? And these are quite similar faces. So people about the same age. And they say, I think that is my favorite face. And then using a magic trick, you hand them the wrong face. And you say, it's a trick. You don't tell them you're doing the trick. And you say, why did you prefer that face? But it is the wrong one. And first of all, they rarely notice. They think, yeah, okay, that's the face, I guess. And then they explain why they chose it. But it can't be the right reason. And they can't be looking into introspecting why they really chose it, because it's the wrong one. But then, in fact, something that he and I did do together, if you give people pairs of faces again, they now like the one that they didn't like before, because you've told them they preferred it, right? You've said you like that face, and they explain why. So when you show them again, you think, oh yeah, I like that one. That's good. That's my favorite. So you can bias. People don't really know what they like, and you can bias them by giving them false information.
Well, then how scary, because I'm like obsessed with like detective and crime shows. And we often see like those lineups where the witness has to pick out a face. So it's so easy to bias somebody to say,
Absolutely.
That's the guy who committed the crime.
You are completely right. One of the biggest problems, eyewitness testimony is extremely problematic in general. People have a really strong sense that they remember exactly what happened in a crime and exactly who did it. But in fact, they are massively influenced by mugshots they saw in the police station, the different people in the lineup, any number of things. So yes, we are very, very unreliable witnesses.
Wow. Dice que, por ejemplo, hizo un estudiante de él en postdoctorado, de hecho antes de que lo conociera, él es de la Universidad de Lund en Suiza, y dice que estudió algo muy interesante, que era la reacción que tenía la gente hacia una cara o hacia otra. Hicieron un truco, después de enseñarle ciertas fotografías de caras con quien se estaba haciendo el experimento, les decían, oye, ¿cuál cara te gustó más? No, pues seguramente esta. Entonces hacían un truco y cambiaban la cara, y lo fácil que era, digamos, sesgarlos, haciéndoles creer que esta era la cara que no les había gustado o esta era la cara que les había gustado, y es tan fácil influir la mente que automáticamente la gente respondía, sí, esa es la cara que me había gustado, aunque en realidad esa cara no era la que les había gustado. Entonces le digo que para todos los que somos fans de los programas de crimen, y que hemos visto esas filas que hacen en donde el testigo tiene que escoger entre estos 5 hombres o 5 mujeres quién es quien cometió el crimen basado en su memoria, dice él que es bien fácil dar un falso positivo. Entonces dice él, somos los peores, digamos, testigos, porque depende mucho de el momento en el que estás, lo que te dice la policía, lo que viste antes de ver estas 5 personas. Entonces, que somos muy poco confiables como testigos y específicamente en un crimen. Now, let me talk about something else. So, we've been talking on the show for the last 15 years about therapy. And it should be basically part of your basic needs. And I always encourage people to go to therapy. I've taken therapy for the last, 25 years of my life. I believe in therapy, and I think that exploring and revisiting what you think is always a great idea. But now, with your book, The Mind is Flat, and everything you've taught us, what do you think about therapy?
Yeah, and this is a very good question, because it sounds a bit threatening to therapy, because it sounds as if what therapy is doing is exploring a kind of inner world of the real things you think, the real things you believe, the real people you like, the real memories. And I'm skeptical that there's much of that in there. We're actually much more improvisational creatures than we think. However, I think it's absolutely right that therapy, and actually also conversation with other people in general, is incredibly important and incredibly helpful. And the reason this is because we are story creating machines. Our brain is continually trying to understand our lives in terms of stories. Why am I the person I am? What's happened to me? What might happen in the future? And when those stories become unhelpful stories, it's really important to examine them and to play with them and explore them and test them, and sometimes to work on changing them. So it's a bit like a creative writing class. I mean, it's not quite the right analogy, but it's a bit like having helpful people to help look at your story and think, hang on, maybe that story's not so right. Maybe you should change it. So we should think of ourselves as essentially authors of our own lives and authors of our own personalities, but we don't have complete control over them, but we do need the opportunity to talk through with other thoughtful people to help us create more helpful stories, better stories that make our lives work better for us.
Oh my God, let me translate to Spanish and then let me just flip. Le digo que entonces, ¿qué onda con la terapia? Llevamos hablando de terapia 15 años. Muchos de nosotros hemos ido a terapia muchos años. Yo siempre he dicho que terapia debe de ser parte de la canasta básica, y dice, a ver, lo que pasa es que, y él es psicólogo, cuando tú vas a terapia, crees que estás explorando un mundo de ideas, de creencias, de expectativas que subyace en tu subconsciente. Y dice él que no está seguro que sea así. Más bien, que el cerebro tiene una increíble capacidad para contarse historias. Y que siempre es súper útil sentarte a hablar con alguien, a revisitar las historias que te has contado una y otra y otra y otra vez. Porque muy probablemente alguna parte de esas historias no son historias necesariamente positivas, ni constructivas, ni que te ayuden mucho. Y hablarlo con alguien más te sirve para reescribir la historia que te contaste. Entonces, más bien, más que terapia, piénsenlo así, sería un curso de aprender a escribir. And it's very interesting what you just said, because actually, like a couple of years ago, I gave a conference, and the conference talked about the art of resignifying your story. And the example I gave is, I come from Nicaragua, which is one of the poorest countries in the world. I came to a foreign country, which is Mexico. I didn't know how to speak the language. I was bullied. My parents divorced at 12. It was miserable and all this blah, blah, blah. And I told them, I can tell my story that way, or I can say, thank God I ended up in Mexico. Thank God I needed to learn a second language. And the fact that I was fluent in English gave me an amazing opportunity in my career. And the fact that my parents divorced gave me an amazing opportunity to end up in therapy and learn so many things about the way I wanted to believe my life happened. And the fact that I divorced my ex-husband at 32, instead of thinking that I was miserable because here I was being a single mom with 2 girls, I bless him and thank him every day because he gave me the opportunity, and that experience gave me the opportunity of becoming the woman I am. That most probably, if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't be who I am today. So there's many ways of telling the same event. And I choose to tell my story the way it is positive and constructive to me. That's the way I choose my storytelling.
Yeah, I think that's very, very interesting. And I think completely the right perspective. It's not really that there's a single true story. Exactly as you say, there are many ways you could tell the same story. And in a way, we're always retelling our stories and reshaping our perception of ourselves. And of course, that then affects the future. It affects how we see what we can do, how our life should progress. And I think actually thinking of ourselves as a bit like fictional characters is really helpful. We have a really strong sense of what characters in books or characters in movies are like, just as strong as we do about the people around us. And in fact, I think as strong as our beliefs about ourselves. So if we have a negative or an unhelpful vision of ourselves, we shouldn't think that's just raw reality. That's just an interpretation. And there are other interpretations and better and more helpful interpretations. And you have given a great example.
Lo que le digo es que se acuerdan que de una conferencia de cómo resignificar tu historia y lo importante que era cómo te cuentas tu historia. La puedes contar como una tragedia o la puedes contar como una increíble oportunidad y todo es la óptica y cómo decidas escribírtela y cómo decidas contártela. Entonces dice que totalmente de acuerdo que es un muy buen ejemplo porque al final las cosas que nos decimos moldean cómo reaccionamos, cómo nos vivimos, cómo tomamos decisiones y cómo se va formando el futuro. Entonces dice, a lo mejor no es mala idea vivirnos como personajes de ficción, que no somos todo lo que creemos que somos, simplemente es la percepción de lo que vemos o de lo que creemos que somos, pero eso se puede moldear sin duda alguna de la manera en que tú quieras. But then explain to me, Nick, explain to me trauma. There are certain events that have happened in life. The death of somebody, a tragic accident, a tremendous loss, something that really shook you and that branded you forever. How does trauma register in your brain, and how do you rewrite what you lived?
I think that's a very hard question. It's a very important question. I think one aspect of trauma is that it essentially breaks your story. It makes your story not make sense anymore. I mean, something happens which is just so far outside of what you thought could happen, or is so hard to deal with, that it's like your story is kind of ripped up or shredded, or somehow you can't cope with it. And we all have this experience, clearly. We've all been through such things, some much more extreme than others. And I think the way to think about that is that to deal with trauma, which is incredibly hard, it is partly a process of trying to find a story, a new way of processing and understanding what has happened to you that can connect that with the rest of your life and the rest of your understanding of the world. For example, if something has happened where somebody has treated you unbelievably badly, awful abuse or something of this kind, it's very easy to imagine that everybody is evil and everybody is bad, or maybe that you are very bad. And that's the wrong interpretation, almost certainly. But it may be take a long time to try to process what's happened, to realize that there's a different story, a story in which some people are bad and some people are good, and some people are caught awfully as innocent bystanders in terrible events. So I think trying to recreate those stories is immensely difficult, and trauma is a very, very hard thing to deal with. There's no easy fixes, sadly.
Le digo que entonces, ¿qué onda con trauma? Con los eventos fuertísimos en tu vida, con la pérdida de alguien, con la pérdida de un ser querido, con un evento traumático, con un accidente terrible. Y dice, pues que es una pregunta bien complicada, porque el trauma lo que hace es que rompe con todo digamos que el storytelling o con todo lo que tú te contabas en tu vida o lo que es parte de tu vida dentro de cierta normalidad. Y el trauma es algo tan disruptivo para el hilo que traes, que lo más complicado del trauma es ponerlo en perspectiva, darle sentido y amarrarlo con todo lo demás que está pasando, encontrarle su propio lugar, ponerlo en perspectiva, y que eso es lo que es muy complicado del trauma. Si alguien te trata increíblemente mal, probablemente instintivamente te grabes que esa es una súper mala persona o que tú eres una muy, muy mala persona y que por eso te pasó eso. Pero la habilidad para darle a las cosas su justa dimensión y no tomarlo solamente como un evento aislado, sino qué significa esto o por qué pasó o en qué contexto, y esto es un patrón o es solamente un evento y esto define todo lo demás o no debería de definir todo lo demás, pues son cuestionamientos que uno se tiene que hacer que son complicados. Now, let me make you laugh. So, when we talk about psychology, you're going to laugh about this. I'm going to tell you the phrase. We talk about the inner child.
Yep.
So we talk about this child that we have inside that is reacting from, all his wounds of abandonment, neglect, injustice, treason, whatever, no? Entonces, when we talk about this inner child, we think that within us are these very tender, childlike, unhealed wounds that come out all the time in our adulthood and sort of define our attitude and decision-making and the way we relate.
Yeah. So I guess, I think of this as a metaphor. So I wouldn't think of it as literally the case that there's, as it were, a hidden childlike person or indeed any other different personas within you. But on the other hand, we are all astonishingly creative in ways that we don't really realize. So we can all inhabit other personas and personalities as we move from one situation to another. In one case, you're being a parent disciplining your children or telling them off. In another case, you're dealing with your own parent. You may treat them very differently. You may react to people differently at work. And there will be a whole repertoire of different kinds of behavior that we're all familiar with. And of course, we can also imitate other people. We can create stories. We can imagine how other people would behave in a situation. So our ability to think through the minds of others is amazingly good. I think the inner child is just one more very interesting but just speculative metaphor. There are so many.
Dice que somos, so we should be natural empathetic if we have that ability, for example.
Well, I think mostly we are, actually. We are astonishingly empathetic. We only notice how unempathetic we are when it fails. We expect everybody to understand everything. When they don't, we think, oh, this is bad. But actually, human beings are wonderfully empathetic most of the time.
Le hablo de entonces qué onda con el concepto del niño interior, que juramos que dentro de nosotros hay esa pequeña parte de niño con todas estas heridas de la infancia, del abandono, de la traición, de la injusticia, y que de repente sale y nos detona todas estas conductas, todas estas actitudes en la vida adulta. Y dice, la verdad es que es una metáfora, es simplemente para decir y para mostrar todas las facetas y todas las caretas de un ser humano y la posibilidad de convertirte en un adulto cuando estás regañando a tu hijo o en un niño cuando te sientes a lo mejor regañado tú, y que es la habilidad que tenemos de convertirnos o de ser muchas diferentes caretas de la misma persona, y le digo que y de conectar con otros. Entonces le digo, pues entonces la empatía debería ser algo natural. Y dice, sí, yo creo que naturalmente el ser humano es empático porque es muy fácil para nosotros ponernos en una situación u otra, y que solamente nos damos cuenta de lo poco empatéticos que somos cuando las cosas no salen bien. I cannot let you go without asking you this question. So next time somebody has a negative reaction to an event, to a person, to a dog because they got bitten by a dog, to an ex-boss, to an ex-husband, to an ex-wife, to a problematic child, what do you think we should think to rethink what we think we think?
Well, I think the most important thing is we should realize that the future is in our own hands. I mean, you think about the patterns of thought we have is a bit like learning to improvise in music. So if you're learning to improvise in a musical instrument, you're always trying new things, and then you're building up patterns which you continually reuse. You can borrow patterns and tricks from other people, and you can layer those on top of each other to create your own individual style. Now, it's hard and it's slow, but we need to establish positive patterns of thought which are helpful and constructive. And then we will, because we're always drawing on those thoughts when we encounter a new situation. If we build up a repertoire of positive, creative, helpful thoughts, that will make our improvisations in the future better and more constructive for us. But it's tough. It's a slow process. We can't magically find a world friendlier and easier to cope with, in the same way we can't magically suddenly play wonderful improvisations. But if we do it slowly and we work at it, we do get better.
Le digo que entonces la próxima vez que pensemos lo que pensamos sobre cierta situación, sobre una persona, sobre una relación, sobre hasta un perro porque te mordió, sobre un evento, ¿qué cree que deberíamos de pensar para repensar lo que pensamos? Y me dice, pues es como un instrumento musical, o sea, gran parte es una improvisación y creo que nosotros vamos improvisando conforme vamos sintiendo, y creo que aunque es algo difícil cambiar la perspectiva o cambiar la forma de pensamiento sobre cierta persona o sobre cierto evento, no es fácil. Ahora sí que, como decimos siempre, practice makes perfect. La práctica siempre ayuda. Y entre más se te vuelva un hábito tener un pensamiento positivo o un pensamiento diferente sobre el que siempre tienes, que es un poco lo que hablamos con Ariel Grunwald de los hábitos emocionales, de que te acostumbras a siempre sentir y pensar lo que sientes y piensas con respecto a algo, la vida seguramente va a ser mucho más amigable. There's a guy that we work with a lot, and he says that it's called emotional habits. You know, the habit that you have of feeling and thinking the same thing constantly over the same person or the same event. And so you have to check your emotional habits.
I think that's absolutely right. Yeah. You should think of as thinking is just like any other skill. And you have to train yourself to do it the right way. And if you do it the wrong way, you'll keep copying the wrong way. So yes, I mean, getting the right habits, absolutely crucial.
Dice que pues sí, el pensamiento es un talento. Y el talento de usar tu pensamiento de la forma correcta, que es un poco lo que hablábamos hace un par de semanas con Joe Dispenza, es un arte y que se puede dominar y se puede hacer cada vez mejor. Nick, I hope this is not the last time you want to talk to us.
Not at all. It's been a real pleasure.
No, it's been fantastic talking to you. Thank you so much for your time. Let's explore this conversation in a second part soon. And let me invite everybody to get your book. En inglés se llama The Mind is Flat, pero en español se llama Todo lo que queríamos saber sobre el cerebro, y estamos equivocados, de Nick Chater, que habló con nosotros hoy para W Radio desde Oxford, Inglaterra. Chris, a big hug and thank you so much. Take care. Stay safe. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much. That was amazing. For a very, very, very good interview.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Phenomenal. How you do the translation. I mean, it's phenomenal.
Well, you know what? Let me tell you a story about training your mind. When I was 21, they offered me to translate the Grammys from Spanish to English, and I was clueless. I had no idea how to do that professionally. I was just fluent in both languages, and I said, the heck to it. So I guess I trained my mind for the last 32 years to think in 2 languages. It's
amazing. I mean, and the degree to which you remember the detail of a long passage, and it just comes out. It's really incredible.
But you see, tomorrow I'll remember just half of what we talked about today.
That's always the way. But no, that's tremendous. No, I would be very happy to talk again if it's been a real
Absolutely. Let's do it for sure in a couple of weeks.
Great. Okay, super.
A big kiss to you.
Great.
Thank you, Nick.